Denise Chaffin doesn't think that recruiting is a transaction, it's a relationship. As the CEO of Top Source Talent and the host of Talking TA, she's redefining recruiters as brand ambassadors and strategic advisors. In her world, the CEOs need to know the recruiter by name because those are the people with the feet on the street. They know what's really happening. So if you're thinking about talent as an edge, not as an expense, this one's for you. I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list.
Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalued.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list.
Thank you so much for being on the leaders list.
Thank you, Bryon, for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to be able to get your perspective, having, had a long storied career in recruiting and talent and understanding how organizations work with talent. So tell us a little bit about your origin story and then, how Top Source came to be.
So I started my career in talent. We called it staffing back in 1988, which is when I started. And I was recruited after a funeral I had attended. I was sitting next to a guy I knew. He contacted me a few days later and said, "Hey, I thought we're looking for a new recruiter for our company, and I thought after our conversation you'd be a great fit." So it was kind of a funny way at a funeral. Yeah.
Perfect. So, I always do all of my top recruiting at funerals. So that's great.
I told him that. We made the biggest joke about that for the longest time. It's like, if we needed to find someone, say, well, hey, let's just go attend a funeral. We'll be funeral crashers.
Sure. And right. Exactly. Wedding crashers, funeral crashers. Yep. I get it.
Anyway, so I started with, it was called TSS Consulting. And it was a small boutique recruiting agency here in Phoenix. John McDonald was the owner of the company. And to this day, 38 years later, John and I are still working on projects together. We're working on a project right now for an aerospace company. So they say never burn bridges, and John and I have, we have not always agreed on everything, but we just have this long-term relationship, and we both know how each other works. And so, hey, we've never burnt that bridge, and it's good that we haven't, because we're still working together. Anyway, so he and I worked together for a few years. I worked for his company, and then from there, I started my own company because I wanted to make more money than what his company was paying at the time. And so I also had some ends with some new business. And so I went ahead and broke away. And that did cause a little bit of a rift for the two of us. But I broke away and started my own company. And it was called Professional Team Search. And I kept that going for a number of years. And then I moved to Colorado. And when I moved to Colorado, I took on a business partner. And she's somebody I had worked with over the years. And so we decided to start anew, and that's where Top Source Talent came in. But we also kind of had a different idea about the business. So, working in talent acquisition or staffing or recruiting, you typically, there's a few different ways you can work. You can either work as an in-house corporate recruiter, working for a company, or you can work as an external resource in a few different areas, either executive search or contract work, which is what we did, or contingency recruiting. And so there were a number of companies who needed help at the time. So my partner and I took on the business of training recruiters how to recruit. And so we took on business that was more hourly, more contract work. And it's just been working for us ever since. Now, she wound up taking a job with one of our clients. So she went from being a partner to a client herself. And so we've maintained that relationship. And again, we have a great relationship. We're really good friends. And she's brought me probably more business than she ever would have brought me as a business partner, just because she's got so many connections. It's been an amazing journey. But anyway, so my role has been more as a leader, if you would, over a team of recruiters. And basically, when we get projects with our clients, then I basically then farm out the work to the recruiters who are on my staff or independent contractors a lot of times as well. Kind of like John.
So like an extended employee base, but they run their own recruiting.
Exactly.
practice.
And honestly, quite truthfully, it's the best way that I have ever found to run my business. Then I don't have to worry about W-2 payroll. I don't have to worry about all of the hassles with having to interact with all these different states, for payroll taxes. It's been, yeah. So, the issue is though, and I would caution people in this industry, if you're going to get into it, make sure you only hire legitimate 1099 employees if you're going to go that route, because there are people who want to be 1099 employees, but unless they have a federal ID number and an LLC set up, they are not legitimate LLC or 1099s. People who give you a social security number and say, oh, I want to be a 1099. Here's my social security number. That won't work. The IRS will come after you. They will hunt you down in the middle of the night. So not a good idea.
Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that.
No.
So that's pretty interesting. Like when you went from that shift of, like, if you were working in corporate, obviously you owned the recruiters and you had complete and total control. Then you have staff. That's pretty much complete and total control. When you shifted to what you say is a better environment, better experience of working with an extended group, how do you manage quality? How do you make sure? I mean, clearly you're great with relationships because that's how your entire career has been built. But how do you make sure that the follow through, the focus, all of the things that everybody worries about when you start working with, people who aren't staff? How do you make sure that you're going to be represented well?
The word that comes to mind for me is communication, especially since that's a great question, especially since we're all remote. Because, you can hire people that you've known for years and they can say something off the cuff that, insults somebody, and that's going to affect your reputation and your relationship with that contract or with that client. So communication, weekly, biweekly meetings with your employees or contractors, constant communication with your client. How's it working out? Is there anything we need to do this week? What are our goals? I mean, and setting up, what would you call it? Like weekly goals for the team or monthly, whatever it's going to be, and having that point person or 2 or 3 point people if you need to, if it's a bigger project, which is what happens a lot of times. If you're doing a good job, they're going to give you more work. And so you need to have people accountable on both sides. Not only that, but I've had situations, in fact, I had a situation a couple of years ago with a client where I actually hired a team manager for one of my projects because I had enough people working on that project. And between all the other projects, I needed some help managing those projects. Yeah. And so I hired a team manager, and that went really well because then he could report back to me and let me know what was going on. In fact, I did that a couple times now that I think about it, where I would have people like basically running interference then for that client work.
And that person also, do they make sure that the partners that you're working with are following through and they're holding them accountable, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you still, even with having account managers or project managers responsible for those particular projects or whatever it is you're doing with that client, you still need to have those touch points, with somebody in that client group, maybe the head of talent acquisition, something like that, to where you are still the person that they can fall back on, if need be, and typically, it's funny. Typically you think, okay, well, if I'm not hearing from a client, things must be going well. Never assume that, right? Never assume that because that client may be just, busy doing other things. And all of a sudden, there's no communication from your side, or there's this gap in communication. A lot of things can go very badly, or they can go very well. But oftentimes if there is a gap in communication, you need to be worried about it. And I'm kind of one of those worrywart people anyway. So I've always been really good with my communications. When I started in this business too, Bryon, years ago, we didn't have all of the different mediums that we have now, the cell phones and the email, LinkedIn messages, all the Slack, all that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's, I think in some ways, kind of a hindrance as much as it's a help, because if you have too many ways of communicating with people, you can get lost in the shuffle that way. It used to be years ago, we only had the telephone, and it really kind of kept things pretty straight. So I still use the telephone. That's still I like to have a voice to voice communication with people. So I would set up or team meetings, either
Right.
a video conference or a phone call, something where I can really talk to the person, find out what's going on, see what new projects are coming up. I mean, you really need to stay on top of these things because business moves fast. And if you're working with a company that's getting ready to have a layoff and you've got 9 people who are supporting them, and all of a sudden you need to find new projects for those people, you need to be aware of where that company is at. You need to also be, staying in tune to the news, keeping up on reports of your clients, follow them, following them on LinkedIn to where any new post or any new information that comes out about those clients, you're receiving that as well. So it's like you need to be almost an extended employee for every client that you're supporting, right?
Yeah. And I think it's really smart, like you were just talking about following them on LinkedIn, but also, are there Google alerts that are set up for their industry,
Sure.
set up for the specific account? Thinking about, when you just start a relationship, how are you going to have information come to you? I think that's super smart. And so when you've gone through this process, you have also extended this now beyond just Top Source Talent. You've started a podcast,
Right.
and
Correct.
so you have Talking TA, right?
Correct. Yep. And that's
And
been going
so-
on 3 years now.
Yeah. So when you went through that process, what was the rationale for it? Why did you do it? And how's that impacted your business?
It was in 2023, beginning of 2023, things were starting to slow down. And so the person who is now my podcast producer, Intel has been a client of ours for years. And we had him on assignment to do what they called talent marketing for one of their new Intel divisions. It was for their, which division was it? I'll have to think about that one. Anyway, he was supporting their talent marketing. And he did such an amazing job. He pulled together this big performance where he interviewed a number of people on this new business unit's team. And then he put together this beautiful video. And so I'm watching it and I'm thinking, wait a minute, he's doing that for somebody else. And I asked him, I said, Heath, why aren't you doing that for us? And he goes, well, I can.
Yeah.
So,
How about I do it?
So he's the one that came up with the idea for the podcast. And he said, it's a really good idea for you to kind of get your name out there and let people know who you are. And the most amazing gift that I have received from the podcast is all these years in this business. I thought I knew a lot about the business because I'd been doing it for so long. Didn't touch what I have learned over the last 3 years.
Wow.
Because working with, specific clients, working on specific projects, you get, locked into your day-to-day routine or week to week, whatever it is. Anyway, doing a podcast, you all have the opportunity, the doors have opened to meeting people in your industry that you would have never otherwise had an opportunity to meet. And they're sharing information with you about the industry or about other industries they're supporting that you would not have otherwise known, especially right now. Over the last couple of years with the adoption of AI into our world, it's been an amazing journey on the podcast to learn from all these different people how they are interacting with AI and what they're doing to kind of keep the human touch, or like what someone said earlier, keep the human in resources. You know what I mean? Because, you're looking for resources all the time, to help to speed things up and to save money and to, for a myriad of reasons. But the human part of human resources still needs to stay human because this is a human-centric business that we're in or industry that we're in. So it's been really amazing to have the guests that I've had. Our Talking TA library is just talking to see our library. There are, 70 some guests on there by now that we've had. And some of the conversations have just been so enlightening. And I would not have had the opportunity to meet these people if it weren't for the podcast. So it's really been a great addition to what I'm doing.
Yeah,
in my, for my
that's
day
exactly
job.
my perspective too. I just love to be able to get different perspectives as you go through this, think about different industries. And so I understand that you have also, having been in the space for, a while, what would you say are the things that are top of mind for you, as you're thinking about top source talent and growing the company? What's on the top of your leaders list?
What we need to be looking out 2 to 5 years. I mean, I think the last year in 2025, everybody was worried about what's going to happen today, next week, what's going to happen this year. And I think it's okay to do that in a crisis, but I don't know. It's a little worrisome for me. I think that, typically in the past, when we were talking to clients about their hiring, part of what we discussed with them is, what are your current gaps, right? But what are you also anticipating 2 to 5 years out? What does your business look like 2 to 5 years out? Because it kind of helps to identify potential gaps that could come up in the future. Not only that, but the people that you're looking for now, really, what are their roles going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, that type of thing. You need to do more kind of strategy planning around hiring. And I think people are kind of going a little bit backwards from what I hear, from what people are telling me, in terms of just trying to plug holes right now. Because, I mean, with all the layoffs, people have lost a lot of good talent with all the layoffs. They've literally opened the door and just let their good talent escape, to try to keep their stockholders happy, from what I hear, kind of try to keep Wall Street happy. They've had these massive layoffs. And then all of a sudden they look back and go, oh, wait, where's so-and-so? They were the expert on XYZ. Oh, that person left. Now they're working for a competitor. So, I mean, there's some strategy, before you have layoffs, before you, start a big hiring ramp. Don't look at just this year. You need to look out up to 5 years from now,
For
even
sure.
with the adoption of AI. So I think that's one of the things that is kind of on my, the front of mind right now.
And so that's interesting, because did you not, I mean, I would have assumed that that's kind of the orientation you always had. You're just saying that recently it moved away from that and everybody was hyper focused on what do we do tomorrow. And now it's gone back to that.
Yep. Because people, I think, were in crisis mode.
Yeah.
For so long, that they forget. And not only that, but there are some leadership issues that need to be addressed now. And that's coming up more and more. Who are our leaders, and who are our leaders listening to? Are they listening to just the people who are running their boards and the executives in that direction? Or are they listening to their employees? Are they listening to HR? Are they listening to people in talent acquisition? Because I have said this my entire career. The people that you hire to do recruiting for your company, we are the front line for your company. We are the ones who hear all of the scuttlebutt, on what's going on in your industry, what's going on with your competitors, what's going on with salaries, what are the new perks people are getting. We hear it all because we're on the front line and people trust us. That's one of the cool things about still being human and not being a bot doing the interviews, the initial interviews, is people trust us because we are human and because we have that relationship that we develop with them. So, listen, leaders need to listen to their TA departments and their HR departments, because we really are the people who are, rooting for you, rooting for the company, and the people that we bring in, those are the people that you want to retain. And hopefully, for the most part anyway, and don't let them escape. If there is a layoff, don't let those people escape. We need to look at business differently. Instead of rushing right away to doing a layoff, what else can we do? Can we put those people in other roles? Can we build out our sales team and maybe put some of the people who are in talent acquisition? Don't get rid of your recruiters. Move them into a sales role if you need to for a while. Or like there was a woman that I had hired years ago after she had been laid off by Intel. But prior to the layoff, she had been in marketing. She had moved from talent acquisition into software marketing because she loved it. I had another recruiter who went into IT work because she loved that. but she was still part of the organization.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So they
Yeah.
found
Well,
an
and she understood how to work through the organization also, right? There's so much complexity in many companies that it takes time just to get your feet under you and understand how things get done. So if you understand the culture, you understand how things get done, I can totally understand why you would move someone, into another role like that. But how often do you get tapped for that kind of information, or are they always coming to you for talent acquisition? And you're the, do you say to them, hey, listen, they're right there.
Yeah.
Like the talent is right there.
Yeah. I have smaller companies, not so much from big companies, because the larger companies, of course, have their own internal teams that are supposed to be doing that, right?
Uh-huh. Right.
Whether they do or not, that's another story. I'm not sure, depends on the company and what their resources are and their budgets are for building out teams to, find competitive analysis teams or change management teams, if you would, to help to assess, what's going to happen in the future with the employees and who do we need to keep, who do we need to move around, who do we need to let go of, if there has to be a layoff, who are the people that are still critical to the company. And now I just lost my train of thought on that. What was I going to say? Anyway.
Yeah. So it depends on the type of organization, whether or not you're given that opportunity.
Oh, yeah. And the smaller companies, do typically, that's the point I was going to make. That smaller companies do actually bring in people to help them, do some gap analysis work and to kind of set up strategy, and also to compare, because we've been doing this for a while, we can compare their company with another client that, and share with them, some of the pitfalls they had, some of the positive results they've had, and let them then decide for themselves, what's going to work best. Just offer solutions. We're here to participate. We're here to offer solutions. So oftentimes storytelling can be a great way of presenting a solution, because you can tell them this is what happened with ABC company. This is what didn't work. This is what did work. And then let them kind of take it from there. And that is very beneficial to a lot of clients.
Yeah, I would think, like you said, from a consulting perspective, everybody knows what talent acquisition, partners are supposed to go and do. But to your point, like there are so many other elements to it. Like if an organization's brand is broken, you're going to see that, and you're going to know that you can't represent that brand properly. And so you can fix that. If someone's onboarding process or training process is horrible, you're going to see them go through the funnel and they're going to lose those staff members. So yeah, I could see where consulting would have to be, a viable option for you from a services perspective and business perspective.
Oh, definitely. Well, in fact, right now that is going to be the new role for talent acquisition. And, we used to be called recruiters before, right? Staffing recruiters. Right. Now we're called talent advisors for that reason. And here's the benefit of AI. So AI is going to come in and help us do a lot of our day-to-day repetitive tasks that we hear about.
Sure.
So it's going to enable us to be more human and to have more human interaction than with our clients, candidates, whatnot. And in doing so, it's going to create a bigger role for people in talent acquisition. We are going to have to be more strategic. We're going to have to look at things from a higher perspective, and be able to ascertain what the needs are, not just of one department, of all of them, and be able to be almost that traffic cop kind of person, helping to direct traffic, helping to direct where candidates can go, or employees. If you're working internally within a company, then you can help direct then some of the employees. One guy was telling me one day that one of the agentic bots that's going to come out, and I think this is a great idea for AI, is to let employees know, have like a broadcast, an employee communication broadcast that lets them know what the new positions are that fit their background. Say, hey, you've been with the company for a year. Here's a new position that's coming up in ABC, department. You might be interested in it. I mean, what a great way to retain employees, right?
Totally.
And there again, you're working with AI. It's not working against you. It's working in your favor. But as a talent advisor, then that employee can come to you and talk to you, and you can kind of help, direct the flow of traffic, for that position or the other positions that people are being contacted about.
That's terribly different than an applicant tracking system.
Terribly
Right.
different.
I mean, that's the human aspect of it. But it's interesting when you talk about that, because I think about, well, if AI does that, then I want AI to also look at my work style, and I want that to match against the manager that's in that role. And I want all of those human elements. When does that tip too far?
Yeah.
That's the hard part, right? Because AI can look at all those things in aggregate faster than we can and see those connections faster than we can. But how do you balance that with the human side, the human resources?
Wow, that's a really good point, isn't it? I hadn't even heard of that before, or heard anybody mention it. I think that with having, what would you call that? Stack ranking, maybe, where you're ranking your role against somebody else or against a manager role that you're interested in to understand.
Yep.
I guess
and my priorities as a hiring manager, or my priorities as the individual, and being able to see how those match. And that is, I mean, that's what every applicant tracking system says that they do. But of course, it's very, very different than having an agent analyzing data consistently to make those matches and see those connections, because the pattern recognition is what's really, really difficult at scale.
Right.
Right.
But that's another
if you're working
role
with a smaller company, it's easy.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
when you get into it, that's not easy.
But like you mentioned, though, I mean, having that AI capability, though, internally, of ranking you to another position that you're interested in, and the person in that role now, that's another area, though, that could be part of HR and talent advisement. And I think that it would be. It seems like it would be. But and there could be some companies who are doing that now. Maybe there is software that does. I just hadn't heard of it, but it's a great idea. Love that idea.
Yeah. Well, so Denise, when you start to look at change, you talked about people thinking more strategically about hires, 2 to 5 years versus I got to get this done in the next 10 seconds. They're going through that process. They're thinking about leadership differently. That was one of the things I heard, that if I were to ask you what should be on somebody else's leaders list, what should they be thinking about? They should be thinking about who do they listen to and how do they listen?
Yeah.
That makes sense. What other things do you think are, if you're giving counsel to the folks that are listening to the show, and you're thinking about their leaders list as they're scaling their company and they're going through this process of finding the right talent, what should be on the list?
Looking at, I think, okay, I'll give you an example, because I like to use stories too. So before any companies start looking at their org chart and trying to decide, okay, what positions, what's going to be critical to our business model this year, next year, moving forward, and not just the org chart. Let's look at the business itself and then determine from there how our org chart should look, right? And when you take and you look at that and you are deciding on the employees that you need to hire, it came up for us a couple of years ago. We actually had this conversation, and we actually did look at, what the business was going to look like 2 to 5 years from now, and what their current org chart looked like, and two completely different animals. It was almost like it wasn't in the same company. Of course, they kept saying, well, our org chart hasn't been updated for a long time. It's like, all right, well, this is a good time to do it, but what is it you're targeting? Some of the people they were targeting were skills that only other people who had worked for the company would have had, because it was such a unique product. It was actually ceramics for engineering for the semiconductor industry. And so they needed these very specialized ceramics engineers. So what we did was we said, okay, how do you feel? We did a LinkedIn search, and we found all the people who were listed there. And we actually went back on old org charts of people who had worked there. And we started contacting former employees And that's
Totally.
who we hired, with some of the former employees. We did find a couple that had the skills that they were looking for that had not worked for them previously. But some of the people, and we had asked them when we recruited them back, to interview for this company, we asked them, hey, so what made you leave? It was leadership. And now they had
Wow.
new leadership. And so they were welcome to coming back, because for some of them, the grass wasn't necessarily greener on the other side when they did leave the company, but they just did not like that leadership. So bringing them back with new leadership, new opportunities, they were happy to rejoin. So
Interesting.
even if you've got people who are leaving the company, or who have left the company, don't completely close those doors. We did it again for Lamb Research about 4 or 5 years ago. Went back because they wanted to hire top female tech talent. So we went back and started finding former female tech talent to bring back to the organization. And it worked.
I love it. Yeah. You just call that the boomerang strategy?
Boomerang strategy. That's it right there.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's it. It's kind of a new term, but I love it. That's a great term. Yep.
Well, when you start thinking about the different approach for each one of these, each company's thinking about it, like you were just talking about, how do you treat people who leave? I know, I think it was probably 10, 15 years ago, everybody was talking about how do we create our network of past employees and create some sort of community and let that live on. And so that was, the alumni networks all of a sudden became like every single company I would talk to, they were like, yep, or, we're building out the alumni network. And that's just standard, right? I mean, that's just a standard way of doing business.
And I think some of the employee alumni networks were started by the employees who were let go, correct? It wasn't by the leadership team.
For sure. And so then the question becomes, how does the company start to create that bridge? Because someone else is already doing it. So that's fantastic. Let it be organic. Let it grow. Just like, Harley Davidson looks at, different groups that all happen to come together, and now they facilitate that. But that all started organically.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. That's awesome, Denise. All right. So I'm curious about you've been doing 3 years on the show. You said you've learned a ton. I'm curious about what's the one thing that you'll give your fellow talent advisors that you learned that you thought was your favorite takeaway?
Oh my gosh. I had one recently that was really good. And maybe, that's standing like right here because I just spoke to her a few weeks ago. But we were talking about, speaking of leadership, we were talking about women in leadership roles. And she had corrected me because I said, I thought it was like 4% of all US corporations, but she said, no, it's the Fortune 500. So 4% of all Fortune 500 companies have female leadership. The other 96% have male leadership. And so we started talking about why. And the one thing that stuck out for me that she said was, she goes, it's because women take longer to respond to questions than men do. Men are quicker with responses.
Wow.
Yep. And so that is one of the key things that has kept them in the prime leadership roles, where women will say, I'm not sure. I'll get back to you on that. We're more that kind of, mindset, where men are like, oh, I've got the answer for that right now. So it's helped them.
That's wildly different than I would have expected, because I expected to hear, maternity, family, different things come into play, but that's a very specific tactical,
isn't it?
Tactical element. Yeah.
Isn't it
super interesting?
I know. It's not to say too that those other factors that you mentioned don't play into it, but that was the one that really caught my attention that I hadn't even considered before. So there's female behaviors, versus male behaviors that have really and it's not to say that women aren't making strides in gaining leadership roles, but to be top of an organization, to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, we have a little bit of work to do. So that was the one podcast recently that I thought, I had these just constant aha moments with her. Her name is Valerie Alexander, I believe. Oh my gosh, Valerie, if I got that wrong, I'm so sorry. It's one of the more recent podcasts, and it's got a picture of a little marshmallow on it, and it's
we'll put it in the show notes, so we'll make sure that everybody can see it. But it is.
But
I mean,
it's great.
It's great to have you working through the industry, trying to help bring that information to bear. And this has been super helpful for us. I always love to ask, if the listeners are CEOs that are running SMBs up to 500 employees, they just listen to you. What's the takeaway? What's the one thing they should stop and do right after they listen to this and go work on it immediately?
Go and speak with the person who is doing your hiring. Who is doing your hiring for your company?
Yep.
Have a conversation with them. Find out what they know. Set up regular meetings and talk, because if you're going to continue to hire for your company, whether you're a small company, I think all companies continue to hire as long as they're in business, because you got people who retire or go away for, one or any number of reasons. But find out who you are putting in charge of your hiring, because that person is the front line for your company. And you need to understand, kind of what their strategy is, what their plans are. Create strategy together. So that would be the first thing I would do.
I love it. That's really great counsel. I mean, as a brand guy, I would say that is probably how the brand is disseminated in a really non-traditional fashion. Yep. And it does come through that individual and their expectations, just like a chief marketing officer. Yep. Those individuals that are representing the company are a powerful touch point. So that's great counsel.
Yeah. And they're representing the company in and as much as your sales staff does, except at a whole different level.
It's a different group.
Yep. And the other thing too, that I would suggest, there was a woman I spoke to at a conference a couple of years ago, and she said, don't go out and buy all the new bling that's out there, all the new AI bling. Let your team help to decide what they need, if they need anything, because oftentimes your own tech stack that you have now will work a lot better than you think it does if you're utilizing it to its full potential. So everyone is saying right now, hold off on buying software until you really know what you need. And there again, let the people too on your hiring team help you decide what that is, instead of just making those decisions. Yeah.
I love it. Denise, this has been fantastic.
Ryan,
thank you so much for being on the leaders list.
Thank you for asking me. It's great to know you, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again.